breaking news. Federal agencies launch major security operation in Seattle. We'll see Operation Take Back America in action.
In Seattle, the illusion of safety shattered the moment federal agents flooded its warehouses, ports, and neighborhoods because what they exposed was not a drug bust, but a structural failure the city has refused to confront. When an 18-month DEA ICE operation uncovers a fully functional Sinaloa command cell operating inside a major American city, the question is no longer how drugs entered Washington, but how deeply our institutions allowed a cartel to embed itself into the bloodstream of local commerce. Nearly 4,800 pounds of meth, 269 pounds of fentanyl, an arsenal of modified weapons, and enough counterfeit pills to annihilate the combined populations of Seattle and Tacoma were not smuggled in by chance. They were moved through legal trade routes, processed in suburban garages, and shielded by logistical systems designed for legitimate business. This was industrial-scale infiltration, a multi-million-dollar machine disguised as ordinary American commerce. And yet the larger narrative was even darker. Fentanyl had surpassed car accidents, suicide, and gun violence combined to become the leading cause of death for Americans aged 18 to 45. Seattle, the tech capital, the symbol of modern progress, had become proof that no city, no matter how wealthy or distant from the southern border, was insulated from cartel infiltration. What made this crisis so devastating was its invisibility. While civic debates focused on immigration policing and political optics, cartel operators quietly built infrastructure warehouses, transport routes, payment channels until the entire region unknowingly became a distribution hub. Their operation relied on one strategic truth: Seattle, with its dense ports and steady freight traffic, offered ideal cover for logistics-based infiltration. And city officials, caught between ideological commitments and practical enforcement, failed to recognize the quiet construction of a criminal machine within their own jurisdictions. For cartel strategists, Seattle's political climate was not an obstacle, it was an opportunity. They understood that a city divided over law enforcement cooperation would provide the very ambiguity in which criminal networks thrive. It is no coincidence that multiple suspects had previously been deported yet returned to Washington undetected, nor that ICE publicly accused local authorities of releasing repeat offenders. The cartel's advantage was not strength, it was the vacuum created by political paralysis. In the aftermath of the raids, as agents mapped more than a dozen interconnected distribution cells between Seattle, Tacoma, and smaller towns along Puget Sound, it became clear that the cartel had engineered a self-sustaining system designed to persist even if leaders were arrested. Each cell handled a separate task: storage, transport, redistribution, making the network resilient and difficult to dismantle fully. This is the true terror of the Seattle case. The enemy was not only the drugs seized or the traffickers arrested, but the realization that a foreign criminal empire had learned to operate like an American corporation, to blend into American commerce, and to weaponize the very openness that defines American society. Seattle was not chosen at random. It was selected because it was vulnerable, profitable, and unprepared. And unless the nation learns from this infiltration, Seattle will not be the last city to wake up to the sound of federal agents battering down doors that should never have been opened to the cartel in the first place. Federal officials made it clear that the Seattle takedown was not simply a victory, but a model for how modern cartel networks must be dismantled. Across Western Washington, the arrests revealed a structure far more complex than a typical trafficking ring. A total of 37 federal counts covering conspiracy, drug distribution, weapons possession, and money laundering were filed against suspects tied to the Sinaloa pipeline, marking the largest multi-defendant indictment in 2 decades. While more than a dozen were apprehended, 6 remained fugitives, underscoring how widespread and mobile the network truly was. The investigation relied heavily on technology-driven enforcement analysts, tracked cryptocurrency flows across multiple exchanges, matched GPS data from seized phones, and decoded encrypted telegram channels that traffickers used to coordinate shipments. Each suspect was identified through a combination of digital forensics and physical surveillance, proving that only data fusion, not traditional policing alone, can penetrate the architecture of modern cartel operations. Yet, as the legal case advanced, the political aftermath escalated. ICE officials publicly accused Seattle's government of releasing repeat offenders and allowing previously deported cartel-linked individuals to return to Washington undetected. Their message was blunt: if local authorities refused to cooperate, ICE would redeploy federal assets and enforce immigration law independently. Seattle's Mayor Bruce Harrell condemned the move as federal overreach and invoked the 10th Amendment, reaffirming that the city would remain a sanctuary jurisdiction. His stance drew applause from immigrant advocacy groups, but ignited fierce opposition from residents demanding action as overdose deaths surged. Within days, downtown Seattle split into opposing factions, protesters carrying shutdown ICE signs on one side and counter-protesters holding photos of overdose victims on the other. The city became the stage for a national debate whether sanctuary protection should stand firm or whether enforcement should tighten in response to a drug crisis that claimed 3,477 Washington lives in 2023, with 76% linked to fentanyl. Through this collision of federal strategy, local politics, and public outrage, one reality emerged unmistakably: the Seattle raid was not the conclusion of a problem, but the beginning of a reckoning. The political explosion that followed the Seattle raids revealed a deeper crisis than even the 4,765 pounds of meth, 269 pounds of fentanyl, and 23 illegal firearms could suggest. It exposed a city at war with itself, split between federal necessity and local ideology. ICE officials did not mince words when they accused Seattle's government of releasing known public safety threats and allowing previously deported cartel-linked offenders to re-enter Washington undetected. Their warning was explicit: if local governments refuse to cooperate, we will redirect our assets to enforce the law ourselves. Public safety cannot be optional. That declaration ignited a political firestorm. Seattle Mayor Bruce Harrell immediately condemned the federal posture as dangerous overreach, invoking the 10th Amendment and pledging to maintain Seattle's sanctuary city identity even under pressure. His vow earned loud applause from immigrant rights groups, but it simultaneously enraged residents who had watched overdose deaths skyrocket, with Washington recording 3,477 fatalities in 2023, 76% tied directly to fentanyl. Within days, downtown Seattle transformed into a symbolic battlefield. Protesters demanding shutdown ICE clashed with counter-protesters holding photos of overdose victims and waving American flags. What should have been a unified response to cartel infiltration instead became a national spectacle of competing worldviews: compassion versus enforcement, sovereignty versus sanctuary public safety versus political symbolism. But while political factions fought in the streets, the operational scale of the federal response demonstrated how severe the cartel threat had become. The DEA, ICE, FBI, and ATF assembled a unified command structure months in advance, coordinating over 600 agents, analysts, and tactical teams in a 36-hour assault that resembled a military operation more than a police action. Helicopters hovered over industrial yards in Tacoma, drones scanned warehouse complexes in Arlington, federal strike teams breached safe houses on Whidbey Island, hazmat squads were deployed when agents discovered grenade components stored beside narcotics. 11 locations across the Seattle region were hit almost simultaneously, a level of synchronization possible only through intelligence fusion and real-time command infrastructure. Analysts had already traced encrypted communications, cryptocurrency transfers, and GPS data to map more than a dozen interconnected distribution cells spread across Seattle, Tacoma, and smaller Puget Sound towns. Each cell specialized in a different function: storage, transport, money laundering, street-level distribution, making the network harder to disrupt and proving that cartel infiltration had evolved beyond simple smuggling into a corporate-style logistics model. The scale of the mission validated the severity of the threat. Federal officials described the effort as a template for future anti-cartel operations, arguing that only military-grade coordination could counter organizations that operate like multinational corporations. In the end, the Seattle operation exposed two crises simultaneously: a cartel empire embedding itself inside American infrastructure, and a political system too fragmented to mount a united defense. The drugs were seized, the arrests were made, but the deeper conflict, the clash between federal authority and local ideology, remains unresolved, ensuring that Seattle's battle is only the beginning. What emerged from the final phase of the investigation was a picture far larger and darker than anyone in Washington state expected: a sprawling network of more than a dozen interconnected cartel cells operating with the efficiency of a multinational enterprise and the stealth of a covert intelligence unit. And while Seattle debated sanctuary policies, real criminals built infrastructure. The fact that 19 defendants now face 37 federal charges should alarm anyone who still believes this crisis is a distant border problem. It isn't. This is domestic penetration, corporate precision trafficking, and intentional targeting of communities where overdose deaths have already pummeled morgues and overwhelmed first responders. Seattle didn't stumble into this crisis. It incubated it through denial, political paralysis, and an obsession with optics over enforcement. The raid was dramatic, but the truth is far more devastating. Cartels operate here because the system makes it easy, predictable, and profitable. What happened in Seattle is not an isolated failure. It is a national warning shot, a reminder that fentanyl isn't spreading because cartels are powerful, but because American cities are unprepared, unwilling, or unable to defend themselves. By the time federal agents launched their synchronized 36-hour assault, they had mapped a criminal architecture stretching from Seattle to Tacoma and into smaller Puget Sound towns, each cell specializing in a specific task: manufacturing, storage, transport, street distribution, or money laundering, making the network resilient even when key operators were removed. The U.S. Attorney's Office confirmed that this takedown produced the largest multi-defendant indictment in 2 decades, with 37 federal counts filed and 51 arrests nationwide tied to the same supply chain. Among the seized evidence were encrypted telegram threads, GPS routes extracted from dealer phones, cryptocurrency transfers hidden behind shell companies, and explosive materials stored beside narcotics, a chilling indicator of how far the cartel was willing to escalate to protect its operations. Federal officials praised the mission as a new model for anti-cartel warfare, one that blended data fusion, digital forensics, and tactical coordination at a scale previously reserved for counterterrorism operations. Yet, as the final arrests were made, the broader significance of the Seattle operation became impossible to ignore. It was no longer just about the 4,765 pounds of meth, 269 pounds of fentanyl, 23 firearms, or the 6.9 million potential fatal doses that had been prevented. It was about the undeniable proof that cartel infiltration had moved beyond the border and embedded itself in the infrastructure of American cities. The aftermath forced the nation to confront an uncomfortable truth: enforcement alone cannot protect communities if political paralysis, sanctuary disputes, and jurisdictional fragmentation continue to create openings for criminal empires. The Seattle case stands as a warning that the next infiltration may already be underway, quietly, methodically, invisibly inside another city that believes it is distant from the crisis. And so, the conclusion is as stark as it is urgent. The United States is not fighting a foreign threat at the border. It is fighting a domestic battlefield shaped by vulnerability, division, and denial. The Seattle raid prevented millions of potential deaths, but it also exposed how fragile our defenses truly are. If cities cannot unite around enforcement, if politics continue to overshadow public safety, and if communities remain unprepared for the scale of modern cartel operations, then Seattle will not be remembered as the operation that turned the tide. It will be remembered as the warning we failed to heed. The scale of what agents uncovered in Seattle was not merely shocking, it was a ruthless demonstration of how deeply a foreign criminal empire had embedded itself inside the United States. Operation Take Back America. The 18-month DEA ICE offensive did more than seize contraband. It exposed a cartel infrastructure operating with the precision of a global corporation. The numbers alone tore apart any illusion of limited impact. For 765 pounds of methamphetamine, 269 pounds of fentanyl, 23 pounds of cocaine, 6.4 pounds of heroin, an arsenal of 23 firearms including illegally modified automatic weapons and explosive materials hidden inside quiet suburban garages. Each quantity wasn't just evidence. It was a blueprint of a system that had matured inside American borders. Investigators later revealed that the fentanyl alone carried the potential to produce 9 million lethal doses, enough to wipe out Seattle and Tacoma multiple times, over a chilling reminder of how close the region came to a mass casualty catastrophe. Yet the true magnitude of this takedown became even clearer as the investigation widened. 51 arrests across the country tied back to the same supply chain, encrypted communications traced through international servers, wire transfers routed through layers of shell companies and couriers moving poison along the I-5 corridor under the guise of legitimate commerce. This wasn't smuggling, it was logistical infiltration, a silent conquest built through semi-trucks, freight depots, and warehouses hiding in plain sight. As federal agents unraveled the operation, they discovered a network structured like a multinational enterprise. From Sinaloa strongholds, cartel leaders orchestrated a pipeline that stretched from Mexico to California's freight hubs and into Washington's ports, embedding themselves within ordinary trade routes. Legal freight companies, trucking operators, and customs brokers, many with no idea they were being exploited, became unwitting components of a trafficking ecosystem engineered for profit and invisibility. Drugs were stored in garages, sheds, and rental homes scattered from Everett to Tacoma, each location chosen for its ability to blend into the quiet anonymity of the Pacific Northwest. Meanwhile, the statistics behind Washington's overdose crisis gave this discovery an even darker weight. In 2023, the state recorded 3,477 overdose deaths, 76% tied directly to fentanyl, with King County exceeding $1,000 deaths for the first time. Counterfeit pills mimicking Adderall, Xanax, and oxycodone were designed to target students, workers, and ordinary families, an intentional strategy to expand addiction. Every number represented a collapsed body, a grief-stricken parent, an emergency room overwhelmed by preventable tragedy. Seattle's crisis was no longer one of perception, but of survival. Fentanyl had overtaken car accidents, suicide, and gun violence to become the leading cause of death for Americans aged 18 to 45. In this context, the Seattle takedown wasn't simply a law enforcement victory, it was the unveiling of a national emergency that had been unfolding in silence. The cartel didn't just infiltrate a city, it infiltrated a system exploiting its vulnerabilities while communities paid the price in. What Operation Take Back America ultimately revealed was not merely a cartel cell, but a fully operational business empire hiding behind the facade of everyday American life, one that exploited the Pacific Northwest's geography, infrastructure, and political vulnerabilities with chilling sophistication. The Sinaloa cartel did not simply smuggle drugs across borders. It built systems that mirrored legitimate industry, embedding itself into the rhythm of commerce with precision and audacity. Semi-trucks carrying fertilizer or household goods also concealed tightly sealed chemical containers. Freight forwarders and trucking companies, many unaware of their role, became the logistical backbone of a criminal supply chain engineered to appear indistinguishable from normal trade. From Mexico's Sinaloa strongholds, cartel leaders coordinated shipments through California's freight depots into Washington's ports and warehouses, and eventually into quiet suburban garages scattered between Everett and Tacoma. Each location, each truckload, each encrypted message formed part of an industrial operation designed to withstand scrutiny. Their communication network relied on encrypted channels, dummy accounts, and foreign servers, ensuring leadership could orchestrate multi-state distribution without ever leaving their hideouts. Meanwhile, couriers moved shipments along the I-5 corridor under legitimate shipping manifests, treating America's highways like the arteries of a shadow corporation. The financial operations were equally insulated. Through cryptocurrency wallets and Delaware-registered shell companies, money flowed through digital coins converted into pesos or laundered through small import-export businesses before disappearing into the financial shadows. By the time federal agents traced one transaction, another had already been washed clean. This was not crime. It was corporate strategy refined into criminal efficiency. But beneath the cold mechanics of logistics and finance lay the human disaster that transformed the Seattle takedown from a law enforcement milestone into a public health alarm. Washington's overdose data read like the metrics of a society under siege. 477 overdose deaths in 2023 alone, 76% tied to fentanyl, and King County surpassing 1,000 deaths for the first time in history. Federal labs confirmed that 5 out of 10 counterfeit pills contained more than 2 milligrams of fentanyl, enough to kill an average adult within minutes. These pills were not packaged for street addicts. They were disguised as Adderall for students, oxycodone for pain patients, Xanax for the anxious and overstressed. Every imitation pill functioned as a weapon designed to infiltrate American households under the guise of normality. Parents found their children unresponsive in their bedrooms. Schools witnessed students collapse in bathrooms. Emergency rooms were overwhelmed as counterfeit pills triggered wave after wave of overdoses. Each statistic was a life lost, a family collapsed, a community destabilized.